For the past 15 years, Oren, Ayende Rahien Eini, has been writing about everything software development with a focus on databases at his popular Ayende.com blog. Since 2004, he has reached millions of developers worldwide. After 7,000 posts of talking, now it's your turn. Today is dedicated to you. Ayende will be answering all of your questions. In this webinar, you control the discussion by mining his brain for precious gems of knowledge that can enhance your skills as a developer. Users from around the world will query Ayende as he takes on the biggest challenges they face. Don't be surprised to see him pull out his ID and create a POC on the spot. You will learn whatever you want Ayende to show you. Feel free to ask questions by clicking the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, because today, Ayende is here to answer all of them throughout the session. Enjoy your presentation, and here's Ayende.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for showing up. We have quite a list of questions for today, and I wanted to start by looking at some metadata. And the question that was asked were mostly about the following topics: about me and how I manage stuff, coding in open source, and about RavenDB. And I want to focus, I'm going to answer all of them, obviously, but I want to focus on the first two topics primarily because they are outside of what I usually talk about. And the first question is from Oren, and I will apologize in advance. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation of everyone here. And he's asking, what is your motivation? And that was something that I had to think very hard about. The primary goal that I have is to do interesting things and have fun doing them. And that's a really interesting thing to say, because Peter here is wondering, how do you handle being a CEO and a developer? How do you manage your time? And it's funny, I used to be a consultant, and then I started being an independent consultant, and eventually this morphed to Hibernate Rhinos and RavenDB and everything. And along the way, I was the developer, the only one that we had, and then the team lead and the architect, and somewhere along the way, I became the CEO, who still touches code sometimes, but I have a lot more responsibilities rather than what gets checked in at any given point in time. And I remember starting Hibernate Rhinos, and I had a very clear goal in mind. I wanted to be able to control what I'm working on. I wanted to be able to work on stuff that was interesting, that was challenging, that would be satisfying to solve. 10, 12 years in, I think that I've done all of those. I still, for the most part, touch code on a not daily, but certainly a weekly basis. Not so good, I will admit on that. And there's a lot of other responsibilities that I haven't considered along the way. Budget meetings is the banks and not much of all of the non-technical stuff of the job. And I handled that by saying, this is what you have to do. If I want to be able to work on cool things, I have to also take the part where I have to sit down and figure out, okay, those are the expenses that are approved, and why are we buying an ice cream machine again? And all sorts of stuff like that. Steve asked, what was your hardest decision? And I forgot to mention, feel free in the middle of the webinar, stop me, ask questions. That's literally what this webinar is about. I have the questions that we gathered earlier, but I would be very happy to take more questions as we do the webinar. So what was the hardest decision? And Howard, what's the best coding story? And Zhang, I assume, what is the worst coding story? And the hardest decision was actually RavenDB 4.0. And the reason it was hard was because it went against everything, basically. You don't do a rewrite. Rewrite means taking everything that you once knew about the product and throwing it away. And especially because what we wanted to do, we knew we couldn't do it in a backward compatible way, which meant that this was a huge risk. We still have users who are running 2.5. This year I had to talk a user who is using 1.0 version of RavenDB, which is 9 years old, something like that. So the longevity of project is enormous. And having put a stumbling block in the sense of non-easily upgradable release is a huge issue for us. The other issue that we have to take into account is that RavenDB is huge. I mean, it exceeds me. I don't actually know. Let's check. Okay, so cd/mountain/c/ that will take a while, but while this is running, I would say again, RavenDB is pretty big, and there's been a lot of functionality and things that we added that we didn't even remember adding to the product that users have depended upon, that they consider to be a required functionality. And I don't think you just read 100 files. Okay. And making that big a jump, changing the entire system, was a huge risk for us. It took 2+ years since we made the decision to the fall release, and it took us another 6 months or so after that to actually complete the feature that we wanted for the release. In hindsight, I absolutely don't regret it. I think that was the absolute right decision to make, but it was a really tough decision because it meant, okay, no releases for 2.5 years, no incentives for people to come in and buy the new version of the product. And I'm really happy with how it turned out, but it was a really, really tough option. Okay, I will just let it run. The fact that it takes it that long to figure out how many files is ridiculous. Okay, so the best coding. I started working on RhinoMox in 2004. So that's 16 years ago. And I was working on a laptop, which for me at the time was really expensive, but was, call it medium of the pack at best. I had a cellular connection for internet. I had the RSS for community. And I don't know how many of you still remember that time, but we had RSS and blogs as a replacement for social media. I really wish that we still had that because that was distributed and independent and there wasn't so much advertising going on. And the reason I think this is the best coding story is because this is what I think is my first real project. That was my first open source project that actually gained traction. That was one of the things that I did for myself to learn to understand, and it went beautifully. I remember it as beautiful code, and I very carefully use that term because I don't know if it's actually beautiful code. I especially don't know if this is beautiful code for me today because my views of what code is good or not have changed significantly. But I was able to maintain that for over 10 years with no need to make any major modifications. It went through, it was released for .NET 1.1, I think. And I think they stopped maintaining that at 4.5 or something of this nature. Something ridiculous like that, and things just worked. So that was my victory. The fact that it worked, it was maintainable, that was amazing. The worst coding disaster. There are two. One of them is Silverlight. I really loved the concept of Silverlight, and we went very heavily on that with the profilers and RavenDB 2.0. We had to replace all of that, both in the profilers and with RavenDB within a year and a half or two, and that was hugely expensive mistake. And been 6+ years, I'm still pissed off about that. The other issue, we had a storage engine called Munin that was written in 2012, 2013, something like that. And it was a storage engine. It was a very early prototype. It was based on append-only model. Mostly it was there to enable in-memory testing of RavenDB. There was a missing toList somewhere, which caused two threads to use the same instance of a list. And I just can't tell you how much pain that caused. And we had 4 people on it for 3 weeks, and I remember feeling stupid the entire time. How can I not be able to figure it out? I wrote this code. In hindsight, that was really important because it taught me several things. First, that if you try again, sometimes you might even succeed. That the things that will trip you can be very, very minor. But it also taught me about the complexity limit that I have. And since then, there have been several cases where I said, I'm sorry, I'm not smart enough to manage this code. I have to find another way to write this. So this will be something that I can manage. Especially there is this old saying, when I wrote this code, only God and I understood what it is doing. Now only God does. And it's true. I know that because there are parts of Raven which haven't seen the light of day for 5+ years. I want to show you something. There we go. So, one project. This bit here. This was originally written here. If you look at the actual meaningful changes, it was last changed somewhere around here. Those would be the last meaningful changes. And it worked quietly and well. And I love it when code does that. But I'm looking at stuff like that, and I'm thinking, dear God, this is something that if I have to go into, the hidden breath, you can do that. This is possible. Okay, let's see. So, Yoshi, why open source? Let's ask it the other way around. Why not open source? Because that's really an interesting question. If you reverse the question, then you have to justify not being open source. And you don't want to be open source if the code itself gives you some competitive advantage. It may be because you prevent other people from taking that and using that and competing against you directly. And I think that in the case of databases, then something like Redis and Mongo and a lot of the other and Elastic changed their licensing to be non-open source because they're afraid of the cloud provider basically coming in and using the software and not paying for that. And someone needs to pay the grocery store, and you can't do that with, oh, here is some GPL code, have fun with that. But if you don't have this limitation, if this is something like that doesn't give you a competitive advantage, that doesn't have some proprietary features, go and open source that, because the code itself usually doesn't matter. It's everything around that that matters a lot more. So Finn is asking, what reference documentation do you use or find the most useful? Are there any documentation? Let's start with that. That really depends on what level I'm working on. And it's really interesting. If I'm working at the operating system level, then the official documentation, the man pages, the MSDN are the best resource. Typically because usually there isn't anything else. I have the Linux programming book, which is something about this big, over 1,000 pages, and it's okay. I mean, it gives you the details that you want, but it lacks the story. And I think that if you have a chance, go and read the actual story, because that matters a lot more. I think that I got into full text search by reading a book by Manning called Hibernate Search. And then I ported that from Java to .NET. And that was my first exposure to Lucene. And 2005, 2006, something like that. I love books. I love stuff that tells an actual story. That doesn't show you here is an API call and figure the rest of that, but tell you, okay, this is the context in which you're supposed to be doing that. Then again, I don't want to read a book every time that I want to use some API. When I started using Libsodium, for example, which has excellent documentation, they have a documentation that talks about, okay, here is, by the way, it's still running, dear God. So the excellent documentation, and they talk about a lot of stuff, and they tell you the reasoning behind this. What does it mean? How does it work? So I think this is, for example, excellent documentation. A documentation which isn't excellent would be, in contrast, something like, I'm not sure if I want to name people here, but stuff that just give you the names of the, or name of the functions, Doxygen or automatic generated functions, stuff like that, which is just, okay, I can read the code. I don't need you to tell me what the code is doing. I can figure it out. Which also brings to mind that the code is typically said to be great documentation, and this is rubbish. Absolutely rubbish. And why is that? I love reading code. I do that for fun. And the amount of time that it takes to go to a code base and understand properly what's going on is enormous. And why is it so enormous? Because you have to understand not just what the code is doing, but how it is doing that. And there are a lot of things that are unstated, that are done that you don't even notice. I read the LMDB code base. LMDB is Lightning Memory Database. It has been hugely influential on my design of RavenDB. And it's not a lot of code. It's about, let's see. So the main thing is this thing. And just over 10,000 lines of code. You can go to that fairly rapidly. And if you try to go through this code, it's dense, really, really, really dense. And that's a problem. That's a problem because after I went through that code base with a fine-tooth comb, I had a certain mental model about how it works. And that mental model actually was how it worked in Windows. On Linux, it had a totally different behavior, which I wasn't even aware of. And I'm talking about here about the file growth strategy that it uses. On Linux, you can map beyond the end of the file. It will work. If you try to access beyond the end of the file, you will get a segmentation violation. However, and this is critical, what happens if you map beyond the end of the file and then you write to extend the size of the file and then you access the map memory? That would actually work in Linux. In Windows, it doesn't work this way. In Windows, it would fail if you try to map beyond the end of the file. So that leads to some interesting observations. And the RavenDB solved that using some undocumented API for Windows, but the whole idea is that I went through this code base many times, being very careful, and missed something that is probably very obvious. And just reading the code is enough. That's why I said that the story is so interesting. I have a lot of blog posts that talks about how I do code review. And I speculate often. Oh, I see that this is doing this. This is probably because of that or that. And I feel awesome doing that. I feel great that I'm able to make that sort of question, to ask to make that sort of assumption. And sometimes later I'm correct or not, it doesn't matter, but it means that I have this also feeling of discovery, of am I right, am I wrong, let's figure it out. So Muhammad is asking, what do you do in the free time that makes you a better developer? I write code. I read code. I practice. Now, I read a lot of code in many languages. I write in substantially less number of languages than I read code in. But I don't try to focus on a single platform. I know the .NET environment very well. I'm currently trying to do something with C and Python, just because I haven't done something there in a while. I've written test project in Rust. I'm trying to do stuff outside of my comfort zone. There are things that I know I can do in .NET in a few minutes that would take me a lot longer in C or in Rust. I'm not trying to get to the end of the road when I'm doing these projects, these exercises. I'm trying to understand what is the actual idiomatic way of doing that and why this is the case. And that's really helped. That really helps to understand how you can do a lot better. Also, I write blog posts, and I find that the act of writing really clarifies things for me. It also helps that I now have an external memory of stuff that I can go and look and, oh, now I remember why this does that or that. That's extremely helpful. Yawar, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right. How to read open source project and not get traumatized. That's a problem. Open source project is code of varying qualities. You may end up with something awesome, or you may end up with the CryEngine code base where you have 800 line functions with go-tos. To be fair, when I write C code, I write it with go-tos. And that's pretty much the only reasonable way one of the only reasonable ways to write proper C code, sadly. takes practice to be able to go into a code base and be able to make some sort of meaningful understanding of what's going on. And typically you would think that, okay, I need to sit down and read through the whole thing and understand the whole thing to be able to do anything. Most projects, especially if you stick to a certain language or platform, have a very similar structure, which means that you can go and try to figure out, okay, where are the differences? Where are the things that make this code base stick? If you go and try to read a business application, the chance that there is something truly interesting in the code base is minuscule. Now, it may be doing something really useful in how it's doing that, but you're not going to expect surprises. Open source projects in general are things that are outside of that. You don't have a lot of open source applications. You have a lot more framework, platforms, stuff like that, which means that all of them tend to be of somewhat higher quality. Not because they're open source, but because they are. One second, something happened.
It's okay.
Okay. Not because they're open source, but because the things that they're trying to solve tend to require better understanding of the system. You can't write a Mocky library if you don't understand fairly well how dynamic dispatch works. And the way that I wrote RhinoMox was based on a library called Custom Dynamic Proxy, which did dynamic IN generation, which means that I was able to, because I actually had to use that, I had to debug dynamic IN generation. And that means that and that means that and that means that I suddenly had to debug that and understand that, and that was incredibly useful. Now, there is a big difference with how you're actually managing this. Are you doing just along the way? Are you simply trying to understand what's going on? Are you interested in the project and want to, okay, I want to use this to do something. Let's see how it works. Let's see what the API looks like from the inside. Or are you actually interested in contributing to that? Are you following up on a bug? You found a bug, you want to understand, is this my code? Is this their code? Do I have to fix that? Stuff like that. There is a saying in Hebrew that I trust it as covet or losel. I don't think that it works very well, but let's see if we have some numbers. Okay, so somehow I don't believe that number. Okay, so I'm not counting JavaScript. So that's absolutely crazy. So if you try to read RavenDB code base, that's 655,000 lines of code. 656,000 lines of code. Costs 5,000. Costs 5,000 files. I'm actually quite surprised by this. This also includes tests and other stuff like that. So let's see if I'm looking at just Voron. Let's see what the number is. So Voron alone is about 30,000 lines of code. Wow. And Voron actually uses Power. So try to imagine trying to understand that. So these two together Just a C# portion, this is 50,000 lines of code. And if you try to understand all of that, especially if you try to understand all of it once, it can be overwhelming. I would recommend that you read through interesting portions. Try to follow the architecture. Try to understand how things work. What I've found in many cases, a project must have some sort of structure. If you get to understand the structure, you can skip reading a lot of code. And that helps. That helps you to focus and understand exactly what's going on. If you read the whole code base, you probably don't need to understand anything at all about the free space handling routine. No one touched it. That's stable code that just works. If you read Sparrow, there is a huge amount of code there related to JSON parsing. You don't need that to understand how Warren works and stuff of this nature. So we have a question about recruiting. And what recruitment strategy would you recommend? And the answer is that I don't know. This is the typical funnel that we go to in order to get a single hire. So we typically work with thousands of resumes, go to hundreds of phone interviews, tens of actual on-site interviews, and then we make one or two hiring decisions based on that. And I've been doing that for over a decade. I had awesome hires. Unfortunately, I also had some bad ones. And it's interesting to see the difference between awful hires and merely bad hires. An awful hire is someone who comes to the office and very quickly it's visible that they don't know what they're doing and they can't fix that. We hired a lot of people straight out of university before they finished university, and for the most part, they were awesome. I hired a couple of interns some 5 years ago, and they were on the dean's list, so presumably fairly good academically. They were both absolutely awful. It took very little time to understand that. So the cost of an awful hire is that you pay them so money, and you lost on other people that you might have wanted that. But typically, you can cut it short very quickly. Note that cut it short doesn't mean, okay, 2 days you haven't completed this complicated task that I gave you, go away. It tends to take multiple months for something to become very visible. A good hire in my field typically takes 3 to 6 months to become productive. An excellent hire, you can see them becoming productive and contributing within a few weeks, but they aren't actually contributing more than they take from the people around them until 3 to 6 months have passed. A bad hire is someone who is not awful. He's also not good, and it can take a lot of time to figure out that, okay, you don't have it to make it here. You don't contribute enough, and that can take quite a lot of time, because again, 3 to 6 months before they're actually capable of producing independently. And some part of that is because of this. Because we have code base that is hundreds of thousands of lines of code. Notice this guy. In multiple languages, it's non-trivial project. So it takes time. And we actually have spent a lot of time thinking about how we do onboarding. And I want to make sure that we don't hire a lot of awful people or bad people. Most of the vast majority of people are here, but we also got some of those. So I'm not sure that they have any advice about recruitment. I used to say, okay, show me code that you wrote. And many people didn't have any code to show me. Some of the most excellent people that I hired have no code to show outside of work. And one of the best people that I know, one of the people that I turn to if I have something I can't understand, at 5 p.m. he locks the system and go home. And that's it. He doesn't think about work until the next day. I don't get that, by the way. To me, it's foreign, but it is working for him and he's absolutely amazing. I think that what I'm looking for when I'm looking at recruitment is to see that someone understands beyond what they are required to. If you only need to understand to pass a course, to get into the interview, those sort of things, then you're probably not the right fit for us, primarily because we work at so many different layers. And I want to be able to tell someone, okay, we need to optimize this call over the network. Find me how to do that. And know that they would have the skills to go and read and understand and make an appropriate determination. And not, oh, I have never learned how to do something like that. I don't know how to go there. I teach in a university, and some of the people that, some of the commentary that I get on homework that we give out is, okay, I got an error. Okay, what was the error? What did you try? Oh, I was using the Node version of some package to generate some Avro file, and I was unable to load them into AWS Athena. Okay, what do you want me to do about that? And I don't want to get those people. I want to get those people who says, oh, I couldn't get it to work, so I try 3 different things, and then I fixed it. Or they come to me and they say, here are all of the things that I tried that did not work, that are known to be bad. Which is funny, because at the same time, I don't want people to spin. And one of the worst things that you can do is to spin on some problem independently. Just sit there and struggle, and not fix that. And the reason this is bad is because you're losing the chance to actually help yourself. You're losing the chance to have other people look at us, oh, you have a missing semicolon here, or something as stupid as that. Most of the problems that we find are stupid. Oh, I did not consider that this value can be negative, or something of this nature. And sometimes you need to look at the problem and says, okay, I need help to fix that. I cannot do that on my own. And by the way, knowing how to do that, and knowing how to do it well, is an incredibly important skill. Okay. I'm somewhat rambling here. If you have any questions or you want me to focus something specific, please let me know. Okay, now we come to the part that talks about RavenDB. And Catherine is asking, what kind of data is typically stored in RavenDB? And the answer is, oh, Catherine is here. Hello. The answer is that there are 3 types. The first one is OLTP data, where you use RavenDB as your system of record to store a transaction operational data. And in those cases, that could be real estate information, tax records, visits at the hospital, a whole bunch of other stuff like that. And it's like saying, what can you write in this notebook? And the answer is everything that you want. But I think that a large part of that is using RavenDB as the system of record. The other option is when you use RavenDB as indexing service, as a not as a system of record, but as a source for aggregated or processed information. So you have all of this information over here. You have some process that put that information, stick it into RavenDB, where you have an easier time of working with the data. And this is interesting because we never actually consider RavenDB to be this use case, but because RavenDB uses JSON and because we have stored features around full text search, MapReduce, those sorts of things, it makes things a lot easier to use RavenDB for those sort of features. And the last thing is that we see more and more is RavenDB used in the edge. And that means that you have some servers in the cloud, on-premise, something like that. And then you have deployed additional nodes out there. And they need to work independently. And for the most part, those are also either records of stuff that happened. I took a sensor, took a reading, and we need to store it somewhere. Or there are actual operations that need to be stored and then retrieved somewhere else. Randall is asking, how do you decide what the next feature to build for RavenDB? We have a list of, I think, some 1,000+ issues in the backlog. And there is a balance between what is the feedback that we get from customer, what is the complexity of a feature, what is the impact. So a good example might be that we recently added a feature to RavenDB that took a week of work, 2 weeks of work. I'm talking here completely. I wrote some part of that. There is documentation to be written. I'm talking about the studio work for the AI, those sorts of things. But the impact is that you can now do load balancing in multi-tenant scenarios in a beautiful manner. And that enables some really interesting high scalability options. I actually have a talk about multi-tenancy next week, I think. So we talk about this feature there. And that's an easy feature to make. It has a high impact, it's very slow, it's very low cost to do, and it just enables things. Sorry, I'm probably allergic to something and I have a runny nose, that's the term. What was I? Yes, the next feature. 1 second. I'm really sorry about that. We'll try to cut it in the edit. But at least now I can breathe. Oh, we have a question from Simon. How do you handle talent acquisition, long-term quality of the code, and your core value at how many levels? Oh, that's a big question. I already, I think, answered some of that with regard to how we do recruit, and I think there is a big deal of overlap here. We think that we think a lot about the what is important for hibernating rhinos, and the people and the knowledge and the company. And the company is the company of the people, not the company, the business, is one of the best things that we have. The code quality is something that we maintain by looking at doing code reviews, doing the usual metrics and analysis and all of the usual stuff that we do. The interesting from our perspective is that I don't like, I'm trying to figure out how to say it. I don't like the nonsense that is usually typical for big companies. And we grew significantly in the past 5 years from 12 people to almost 40. And that had necessitated changes in the way that we build the company, that we manage the company. I think that putting a focus on people and showing them how their value is one of the things that we still have pretty good grasp on. And for example, we offer free training for anyone in the company. Tell me that you want a book, a tool, a course, and you will have that. Tell me that you need something, and that something can be, I need to get rid of my accent. I did not take advantage of this offer. Or I want to understand better machine learning and AI, so we'll do that. And you need a tool, so as long as it's not, a multi-million team, the typical answer is that, okay, you will get it within a day or two. And I think that's one of the primary things that we have. Okay. So next feature of RavenDB. I mentioned that there is a balance between the impact on the product, the complexity of the feature itself, and the future I want to say the future cost of the feature. There are certain features that we don't want to implement because they are known to be bad in terms of future expenses. For example, let's say that we implement a feature, send alert over emails. It's a technically small feature. It has a huge support cost. Oh, I want you to support Exchange and Gmail and Sendmail and a whole bunch of other stuff, which has slight differences that you have to support and understand. You have to handle what happened if the email didn't get. Now it's your fault that you didn't do that. All sorts of stuff like that. We got burned very badly on trying to do things that aren't us, so we're not going to do that anymore. We have Sanjeev asking, from operation perspective, how do you optimize the production running data model beside adding or removing indexes? And the answer is that you sleep at night. Yeah. By the way, when I was talking to about hiring and how do we maintain people, Debbie's asking me for 6 months to Charm School, and I don't even know what Charm School is, but send me an email with the details. Anyway, operation perspective, it's a tough question. Tough questions because the answer that I want to give you is don't. We spent a huge amount of time and effort trying to set things up, so you don't really need to configure 2,000 parameters to get RavenDB running properly. You should be able to just run with that and not really think about. We have customers who deployed us to thousands of millions of locations, and the notion that we must be zero admin and heads off is very important to the way that RavenDB works. That said, there's a lot of metrics that we expose, lots of stuff that we make available. There's a lot of configuration options that you can use. I just don't want you to touch them because that usually means that we haven't done our job properly. We had a bug once where RavenDB was suffering from a high memory utilization and become very, very slow. If you introduce a new index, the system would effectively be down for 24 to 36 hours. And when I heard about that, I was like, no, that's not how it works. That's a huge bug. And then we go to the system and try to understand what's going on. And it turns out that they set the minimum index batch size to be 32,000 documents. So 32,000 documents. Each document was about half a megabyte. So you had to load about 15 gigabyte of documents to run. The server had 16 megabytes, 16 gigabyte, sorry. And you had to load 15 gigabyte to run before you could start indexing. And they set it up because, more minimum size is better. And we respect the minimum and we die because of that. Any removing indexes is important. Monitoring the use of your system is important. Looking at the CPU utilization, memory utilization, I/O is very important. Once you see something odd, something different, that's when you start investigating slightly deeper and seeing what's going on. We had a case where user opened a subscription per page view that caused the system to read the entire database, every page view. We had a user who was running very big documents. RavenDB actually has a lot of alerts and performance hits that it does internally, specifically to make it easier for you to understand what's going on and how it's working. And the problem with optimizations is that they tend to be very specific for a particular use case. Okay. Joe is asking, the 3 most underused RavenDB features every user should know about. Lazy include are 2 features that are meant to make it easy to reduce the number of time you have to go to the database. And they are not used nearly often enough. Multiple writers, RavenDB has the ability to manage multiple writers on multiple nodes at the same time, even when they're disconnected, and that is a really powerful feature. If you write in partially connected system and those sorts of things, it makes things much easier. And then we have unit of work. More specifically, we have people who do this. And it just makes me want to cry. Not just because I have allergies or something. It really makes me want to cry. Look at this code. You see this user? This loads a user and close the session. You just load change tracking. You just load optimistic concurrency. You just lost so much in the system that you would have to read on your own. And it's just a huge waste. So we have Willie asking web and mobile synchronization, and Merdan, any plan for supporting mobile platforms? So let's see. we have a project which one of the intern has built, which I can't find right now, which is really annoying. Okay. This is annoying. I was certain that we had it here. Okay, so I probably won't be able to find it very easily. Let's see. There we go. Here we go. So what we have here is a driver that can translate bidirection between PouchDB, which is a small database that you can run in mobile or web application, directly to RavenDB. That's the extent that we have right now. We want to support other locations, but you have to understand that there are huge differences between running on mobile devices and running on servers. Some of the big changes are things that, okay, here I have to worry about power consumption. When I'm running as a server, I'm talking about efficiency in processing the maximum number of requests. Power usage be damned. I need to process the request as soon as possible. So there is that. The PouchDB to Raven is probably one of the options that you have here. Matthias is asking, best ways to create report on top of a multi-tenant system, and when will timestamps be supported by the Node.js client? The Node.js client is being updated to 5.0 as we speak. It's scheduled to be released with 5.0 as well. As for beating multi-tenant systems and reports, I'm not sure why you call out reports explicitly. I had somewhere out here. There we go. So if you want to build multi-tenant, you can use this to add filters where tenant ID, something of this nature, and verify that the entity that you loaded is of the right tenant. If you have something about reports of multi-tenant that is specific, let me know. I would be very interested to hear about that, because I don't see anything else. Notice that when you write, the reports in RavenDB are typically handled using MapReduce. So you just have to make sure that the reduce contains the tenant ID. Then you can just filter based on that and everything will just work. Matthias is answering, reports would be across all tenants. So let's say that, where is that? Let's say that this is a multi-tenant system where the tenant is a company. And here I have orders that are for a particular company. And the report that I would have is something like, okay, how much money have I spent? So this would be my multi-tenant index because it's grouping by this. And when I'm querying, I would query on the particular company that I'm using. And I think this is the viable option here. The other option is that, oh, I want to have reports that are for all users. I just remove this. So I think I'm missing something in the question. If you could clarify that, I would be very happy. Okay, so Matthias is asking, under the impression that every tenant has its own database. And that is one way of modeling multi-tenant data. David, can you confirm that the multi-tenant database is a multi-tenant application in RavenDB is next week? I'm pretty sure that it is, but I want to make sure. And I will talk about that, but if you want to have a cross database reports, then the typical, when you have tenant per database, the typical way to handle that would be using RavenETL, where you push those data into a certain location and then do the appropriate aggregation there. Okay. So now we have Marco. Sample model for sorting, paging, nested file folders, blah, blah, blah. Let's look at that. So there are two ways of doing that. One of them is to say we have a document per file, which looks something like this, or you have a document per folder, which looks something like this. Now, a lot of that depends on exactly what you need to do. You can also say, okay, I would use the IDs of the documents as the paths, because RavenDB allows you to do things like load starting with and things of this nature. And that makes it much easier for you to handle. I'm not really sure what you're trying to achieve here. Remember that also RavenDB has attachments, and the easiest way, I think, to model files and folder would be a document is a folder, the files are just attachment inside the folder. I would go with something like this more than anything else. Now, we have lookups. Now, there are two types of lookups. One of them is something like this, the ship to, something of this nature. And at this point, you have point in time or immediate reference. For something like a shipping label, something like that is frozen at the time of creation, you want to use a point in time. You want to copy the data to the appropriate location. If you ask me what is the name of my company, I have to go for me to my company to ask what the name is. That is immediate reference because the company, okay, so David confirmed that the multi-tenant database is next week. Multi-tenant in RavenDB webinar is next week. Sorry, by the way, I'm not feeling super great today. So that's immediate reference is when I have something that I can't store here because I'm not owning that. That's owned by someone else. The company name is owned by the company, not by Oren. So I have to always fetch it from the associated document. The other thing is what happens when we have lookups in terms of, okay, how do we find stuff like this, Texas and TX, New York and NY, stuff like that. And I like using something called configuration documents. For enum values, for those sort of things, this is perfect. This is small, it's cheap. You can use aggressive caching on that. Also a feature that people don't use very often, and that handle things quite nicely this way. Then we have modeling for people, contracts, and revenues. And Daniel, I hope that you're here. I'm not seeing him here, but maybe. So how to model person with contracts, revenue lines, and valid for date range. The rule about modeling RavenDB is that a document has a single reason to change. So a person is not a contract. Contract is typically independent. So a contract will be its own document. Now the question is, what is a revenue line? If you're talking about contracts as a lease, and let's say that the contract is, let's lease an apartment to multiple roommates. Each of them has a separate lease. Then we might want to ask something like this. And the way to do that would be, okay, each revenue line, this point would be its own document that is associated to a contract that might be on a person or, so the question is whatever this has the person or not. That's an interesting discussion, but basically all three of them would be documents, and then doing that would be a fairly simple MapReduce or this to filter by the contract and maybe pull the person ID or something of this nature. Okay. Paula is asking, can you tell me a little bit about MapReduce? I did it a week or two ago. This is a full webinar talking about MapReduce and how it works. MapReduce RavenDB is a really powerful tool because it does the aggregation behind the scenes. When you query, everything is immediately ready for you. Now we have Nicola asking best practices about update indexes in production. Index creation, create indexes is something that you would typically do in development. Sometimes you have users who are feature flagging that. Sometimes this is part of the admin page or something of this nature. In RavenDB 4.0, all index creation is always done on a side-by-side nature. And that means that for the most part, deploying something like that to production isn't supposed to have a huge impact. RavenDB know how to throttle the overall utilization of the system. Still not something I would recommend doing willy-nilly, especially on the production systems that are critical. Another thing that you have to consider is not just creating indexes, which is static, but also the dynamic indexes. What I like to do is to say, okay, let's run the system against a test database, do everything that we can do on the system to teach it as much as possible about what you're doing. And that will cause RavenDB to generate the appropriate indexes, to fill up everything with all of the information and stuff like that. The MapReduce link is right now on the chat. And I think that it should go to everyone. There we go. Now it's on the chat. And so you run RavenDB, you run your test against a test version of RavenDB, and then you do the following. You go here, export data. It says, I just want you to get the indexes. That would give you a file with just the indexes. That includes static indexes and dynamic indexes as well. So now I can take this and push that to another production database on before I go to production. That would tell us that, okay, a new query that might need a new index, something like that. By the time that I actually deploy, I'm already going to have those things ready for me. Now, we have a question about row-level security. And the answer is that it sucks. It sucks really, really badly. Now, why is that? Typically, you want to be able to say, for each user in my system, I want to have different permissions. You get to see this document, you don't get to see this document, stuff like that. There's a problem with that because the way that the system works, the way security system works, and the way that the way security systems work and the way that RavenDB thinks about the systems tend to be very different. For example, let's say that you have an employee that wants to request vacation days. So going to go ahead and create a vacations day document, vacation days request document, which then need to be signed off by the manager. Now, there are rules, business rules around that. An employee can generate a vacation day request. The manager can approve or deny that. The employee can change the vacation day request until the manager reviews that. And a bunch of other stuff like that. Notice that create a vacation day request is very similar to create a document. Modify a document is modify the vacation day request. But until the manager reviews that, how is RavenDB supposed to know about that? How is RavenDB supposed to understand that the manager can approve or deny, but can change the dates? So there is that. There is also a checking permissions during querying. If you don't do that part as part of a query, that creates a huge amount of complexity around paging and sorting. So the model that I typically recommend is doing this. You can see here that we have permissions, and we say here the entities that are allowed to access this. Now, employee 1, groups admin, group users. If I run this query, I'm going to get no result from the system. Why? Because there is no match here. This query match on EU cells, so I would get a result. Now, it means that all of my users have their tags, and there has to be some sort of a match between them for the system to work. You might also want to make this somewhat more complex with, oh, you have permissions to do X or Y or stuff like that, but something like that. Notice that this is something that happens inside your system. And that's important because let's talk about this for a second. You can't have role level security at the certificate level. At the certificate level is how RavenDB identify a connection. Now, you might want to say, oh, every user will have their own certificate. You can do that, but then you just absolutely killed connection pooling, which is hugely important for performance. So, and even with databases do implement role level security, the connection pooling issue is a huge problem. The other side of that is that, okay, now I have a single connection and it rotates between different users, which creates its own set of problems. Oh, I forgot to switch and a bunch of other stuff like that. I'd much rather do that explicitly in the application code. Doing that explicitly in the application code doesn't mean doing that every single time. You can do it using those functions and add permissions and do the validation. There's also only 4 stores, so you can add additional validations based on your own business logic. Okay, Ashok is asking, how do I do sequences? And I assume that you're talking about, I want to have consecutive values that are known to be companies. You do it like that. You do a pipe in the end. A pipe, so there are 4 ways for RavenDB to generate IDs. Do it like this, put a slash in there, generate this. Sum, always increasing numeric value. Put in a pipe, use identity. This is safe to do in a cluster. Notice that I don't have the slash A or something like that here. Why is that? Because this change was run to the cluster. All nodes will agree that this is the case. Even if you go to multiple nodes at the same time, you're not going to have any conflict, any mutual things. So that's it. The other option is to use Hilo, which is what this is doing. And this is typically done from the client side. And this is very efficient because we get whole batches of documents back, or you can select your own using user/end or something like that. Okay. Kanasan is asking 2,000 documents, 250 kilobyte in size. Let's do some math. This is a problem. This is a problem because of the physical structure of what you're asking. It's going to take me probably a second or two, probably more, because the data is not going to be sitting all in one sequential location, just to read the data. In a 1 gigabyte per second, it's going to take 4 seconds to send it over. You can use streaming, which is the appropriate way to handle this kind of data. You can use projections to pull just the fields that you want. But eventually, if you deal with 500 megabyte of a request, that's going to be costly. I'm not going to be able to answer that. I'm over time as it is. We are going to have a webinar about that if this is of interest. We learn a lot about how to structure things so there would be a minimal amount of complexity going forward. So I'm sorry, I just don't have the time to do that. We have a question from Yawar. When is your libgavran book expected to be completed or released? I have absolutely no idea. This is a book I'm writing about how to build a storage engine. It's currently just under 200 pages in, and I managed to not quite be able to write data to disk. Nothing concrete, just, a string to disk. That's taken me 200 pages. I hope that in a couple of chapters, so about 20 to 40 pages, I would be able to move on to do data structures or actually be able to write multi-threaded stuff. But I'm doing that and discovering how it goes as we go along. And do you have any more questions? As you can hear in the background, the dog is probably going crazy. It's time for her walk. So I don't think there are any more questions. If you have any, again, use the mail list, use our email, contact us, and we're very happy to do something like that again. Hopefully I will feel better then, and sorry for the runny nose. Thank you guys, and goodbye.